since we are limited simply by the senses that we have, we can't say that we're looking at the whole thing in itself at any moment because, we're not seeing what a bat's seeing. We're not seeing what an elephant's seeing. Who's seeing the real thing? Some animals have way better sight than us. So are they seeing something realer than we are? It's no, we're all looking at different dials. And, we have our senses on those dials. We have our thoughts.
Of psychedelics and all consciousness work really is
Mhm.
changing perspectives. I think that's really what it comes down to, because when you do change your perspective, that's the only thing that allows you to mentally break free of the things that were shackling you down to what you think that you are, because ultimately we don't know who we are. And
Mhm.
that is the main question.
Have you ever heard of the neti neti
The neti
technique?
neti. No, I never
Neti
heard of that.
neti. So I've been using this technique. It's basically a form of meditation. It's self-inquiry though. So neti neti is translated to not this, or not this nor that. So that's a process of meditation where instead of like just questioning yourself, trying to figure out who am I, you go through the things in your direct experience and you question yourself, am I this? Is this essential to my being? And then, not this, not this. So, like, you would go, for instance, am I my thoughts? And you'd say, well, my thoughts aren't essential to me because they're fleeting. They change at all times. I remain once they're gone. So, okay, not this. I'm not my thoughts. And and you go through the process of, you could go to, you'll have your eyes closed, you'll feel the sensations in your hands, and you'll say, okay, well, am I the sensations in my hands? It's like, well, those also are fleeting and they're also just sensations. I am not a sensation, and it is not permanent to my being. And the idea is that you go through all these different things in your mind, and by process of elimination, you're left with what you actually are. So you go through whatever your perceptions, your sensations, your thoughts, and you'll find that you are none of those things. And what you remain with is simply your being. So I found it a fun process because, like, just meditation sometimes this is an engaging form of meditation where you activate your mind. You're not simply just putting your mind away. So it's a good way to switch it up for me, and it's interesting because all the things throughout your day that you normally identify with yourself, when you sit with them and you ask these questions from purely your direct experience, not you know any type of concepts or whatever, you just directly experience and ask these questions. And then you'll find that the things that you identify throughout the day with is not what you actually are. Like you could say, you could open your eyes and look at your hands and say, am I the sight of these hands? Well, your sight, your seeing is also always changing. You're not always looking at your hands. So that's a way where you're questioning your direct experience. So even though when your hands are behind your back, you think I have hands, well, you're having no experience of them other than like perceptions and sensations, and you are not a perception or a sensation. So you go through whatever is in your mind, and it's a fun form of meditation for me at least, and I've been using that lately.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's like a stripping away of all the things you
Exactly.
identify yourself as day to day that cloud your mind, cloud your judgment, and sort of take you away from the essence of your true being. So, how has it been working out for you?
I mean, I think it's awesome. It works out well. I mean, it puts you in a place where you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, throughout the entire day, like I said, you're identifying yourself with these things and you're so attached to everything. But once you strip it away, you're like, okay, well, that's not what I am. You're stripping away, stripping away. And then you are left with just being, just open being, willing for anything to come into it. Basically, just consciousness itself.
What do you think is the utility of that? Like I have a personal opinion of the utility of stripping away all that stuff, but I'd like to hear it from you. Like, what do you think it does for you to be able to strip away all the things that we generally identify ourselves with in the material world and sort of get in touch with that inner being?
Well, I think for me, I'm a curious person first off, and I think we always want to look out there and know things like know about certain aspects of life or objects, whatever, and it has to cross your mind in order to know anything at all. You have to know that which knows that. You know what I mean? If you don't know the subjective aspect of what is knowing, you have to know what is knowing to truly know about a thing. So I think with the neti neti process specifically, it's like in order to know what you are, you have to first know what you're not. Like that's the first step. So knowing what you're not isn't going to show you what you are, but it's like going to lead you there. And eventually through the process, you can have like a direct experience of what you actually are. And then when what you are would be just being itself, the I am. So you are just pure being. I mean, awareness is a good word, but I think being is a good word because you can really put yourself in the experience of simply being, not being human, not being in a room, just being is, and that's what everything is. I mean, there's a good quote I heard. It's the amness of the self is the isness of things. So it's basically saying that am and is are the same thing. And basically, that means everything is just being. It's just shining being at you through you. It's just one being happening at all times. And I mean, and then as far as like how it can help you, and it just, for me, it helps me live in the present a lot more. So I'm not like, it's just like, it's an anxiety killer. It just kills anxiety. It kills any of your problems. That's what I've been recognizing. And it's it allows me to just simply be. And like if something worrisome comes up in my mind, I just sit where I am now. It's kind of like the Ram Dass, be here now. And then I'm like, well, everything is just perfect right now. You can experience pain, physical pain, and you're not going to be able to avoid that, but you don't have to identify with it. But as far as normal things throughout the day that bother people, as far as like, emotional stuff or anxieties or depression, I think this is like it's a godsend because you it you can push all that away and just simply be yourself, and your true nature is peaceful and loving. So without the thoughts and concepts all coming into your head, you release all that and then you just feel peaceful.
Yeah, it seems like when you identify with all the things around you day to day, the things that cause anxiety, and you place your values into the things that emphasize your separateness, it's hard to be in the world, but not of the world within that framework.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and it's so like life changing just to kind of fall into this kind of path and start seeking, because for me it's so interesting to you know just think about the way that I used to see things, how things were to me compared to now, like going through this process and seeing things differently, like from now to how I was when I was like an atheist materialist is, it's night and day. I mean, and now to me materialism seems funky, like just the concept of matter. It's you know matter has never been experienced, because if you think what matter is, it has to be something that exists outside of consciousness. So because they say consciousness is derived from matter, so nobody has ever experienced matter. All matter that has ever been experienced has to be within consciousness. Nothing has ever been experienced outside of consciousness. So it's like to have that indoctrination and flip that in your mind and think that, the thing that we only ever experience is derived from something that was never experienced or could ever be experienced from something or from anyone, it's kind of mind blowing.
So are you saying that the experience, because like the way that you would experience something in the material world would be the experience of a sensation, the experience of seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, hearing. That's how we would experience materialism, essentially. So, is what you're saying that those are all contents of consciousness? So, the experience is actually deriving from consciousness rather than consciousness deriving from what's external?
Right. It's just pure experiencing. And like, even if you think about, like, pick one of your senses, like sight, like when you're seeing just, what you're seeing, your mind divides everything up into objects, your human mind. So, like, you see, a computer case, all this different stuff. But when you go directly to the experience of seeing, it's like, is seeing itself many things or one seamless whole? Before you divide it up with what you're looking at, when the experience of seeing is a seamless whole. It is one, and like you can go into all the different your different senses. So what one thing I've been doing for a long time actually is thinking about, like, every state you're experiencing is a single whole, rather than like, if you are hearing something plus seeing something, it's not two separate things. It is one full experience. Like the sensation in your hands mixed with the sight that you're seeing, it is one seamless whole. The mind cuts it up like it's two separate things, but it's experiencing all at one moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, why is it that we do that? Why is it that we divide our senses up into parts as opposed to experience something as a whole? Is it because we don't have the innate ability within our cultural awareness to be able to experience something within a whole because it's just not in our vernacular, not in our mode of thinking or our value systems?
Yeah, I think that like something like that, if you had like a society, like a very advanced society that kind of raised people in that form of thought, I think it could happen. But I think it's kind of just human nature, the experience of being a human, to do that. I mean, everything in this realm is apparently dualistic, but it's when you decide to do the investigation that you see that all separation is, it's more of an illusion. So there's a reality to it. Illusions are real, but we're not seeing it properly. So you can, through these types of investigations, you can break everything down and kind of see what it actually is, which is, it's like unity. That's all there is to it. It's one. It's funny also, like, all the uh Vedantic like teachers and stuff, because with dualistic language, you can't describe the thing, what we're talking about. It can't be described accurately. So they don't use like the word one. They decide to say not two, because they would rather say what it's not than try to attempt to say what it is. Because even saying one is dualistic, it implies something else, but it's not one because there's nothing else. That's why they say not two, which I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like an indirect way of saying one without creating the separation that one ultimately will result in when you bring that into, the duality. But something interesting I think about what you said was it's interesting that we have to work against our natural tendencies in order to discover what really is. I
Mhm.
wonder why that is. It almost makes me feel like there's a responsibility in biological entities that when they reach a certain level of consciousness or awareness that they have to work to break free of the physical boundaries in order to like discover the secret of the mystery or something
Mhm.
like that. I don't know if that's just the adventurous part of me that says that, but it does seem like that's sort of the way that it goes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, at any moment in time, or like, go back thousands of years, whatever, there's always some small group of people that are doing this. And there's even a smaller group who've got it down, but it doesn't pervade our society. I think it has to be amplified in such a way and like embedded into a culture. I think the closest was probably like India a couple thousand years ago or something. But yeah, I mean, but why we are like this, why we constantly divide things, I think part of it is kind of the beauty of the human experience. Because as what I'd say you truly are is infinite consciousness. But as infinite consciousness, you can't experience anything finite, like material things. Like being a human, you can't. There, the infinite cannot know the finite, and the finite cannot know the infinite. Meaning, if the infinite knew something finite, it wouldn't be infinite anymore. Because in order to be infinite, anything finite would have to be included in the whole. So, like, we kind of apparently localize into a human to experience the creativity and beauty of God, basically. And then the beauty of it, especially, is then recognizing what you are and seeing that it was all an illusion in a sense, where there never really was this. Like, personally, it's interesting because my DMT experience showed this to me in a way, and it's funny now that I'm like reading and practicing this stuff. It's like it's exactly in line with that DMT experience. It's crazy. But yeah, it's like then you can see the beauty of what you really are, and that what your experience is illusory, it's real, but the way that we divide it up in our minds is the illusion. It's not real. It's not actually the way that the human mind thinks it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't subscribe to simulation theory, but I think that it's a useful way to understand what we're talking about here. Because if you look at reality as a field of information, and you look at it as we are inhibiting these biological spacesuits in order to acquire the senses, to disseminate that information and interpret it in a way that allows us to live in the physical world. But it's almost as if it's like a computer.
Right.
When a computer is interpreting code, it's interpreting like let's say CSS for instance, because so there's HTML, which would be like the website structure, and then the CSS is the code that creates the design of the structure. So if you want text to be blue instead of black, you code that into your CSS, and it will create sort of a coat of paint or an image that is designed in the way that you want it to be designed in. And that's sort of the way that I interpret reality. It's almost as if we're writing the code of CSS to create this coat of paint or this design on top of reality, but we're not truly getting to the code
Right.
portion of it, which is that information field that reality is built on.
And I mean, I don't subscribe to simulation theory, but I also like it because I think at the very least it's a step in the right direction that says, that this reality is immaterial, which I believe it is immaterial, and it is a unified whole. If you look at a video game, it's obvious that that's not a material world and it is one unified whole. And but the problem with simulation theory, which is weird, is that it kind of posits a physical reality outside this reality with some type of computer. So, like, there is a physical reality. We just never seen it. We never can see it. And it's just creating this simulation. So, I think it's totally of the times for this theory to be arriving, though. I mean, why wouldn't it? This is how we're starting to see things through a technological lens. Um, but I personally like the God's dream analogy more, or just comparing reality to a dream, because I mean, a dream is something that we really experience and it's something that is totally real. And, in the dream, as your dream self, you're so afraid. Like if you're getting chased by a tiger, you're afraid and you're afraid that you're going to die when it gets you. And then you wake up, maybe it gets you. You wake up and you forget about it. You're like, you don't like mourn your dead character from your dream. So you're dead. You like you died. That you will never see again. It doesn't exist anymore. That whole reality that was created by your mind is dead and gone, and you don't like mourn it at all. It's you know it is what it is. We don't really identify with that once we're not experiencing it.
And that idea translates directly to the video game simulation type thing. But with the simulation, I feel like we put a little more stock into that because it exists within a physical world. As you said, it's as if there's a physical world that exists like outside of our own.
Hmm.
And I think that's the only way that we can, as a group, sort of think about something that exists outside of this, because we have a really hard time thinking about what existence would look like if there was a reality that's outside of materialism that exists in, say, a different dimension.
Hmm.
We only understand dimension from like what I would consider like we're our perspective, we're like the 4D perspective,
Hmm.
and we are looking at the three-dimensional world.
Right.
And for us to take ourselves out of that, it's almost impossible for us to think of it unless we think of it as we take ourselves out of it in order to observe a different 3D world, because it's really hard for us to grasp something that we can't grasp, you know?
Yeah, we can't like our minds simply can't imagine like a higher dimensional object, which is what's incredible about psychedelics. You experience the impossible. But like you said, we're, four-dimensional beings and we can manipulate three dimensions. So the fourth, I would say, this is what people say, is time. And we can't manipulate that, but we can manipulate the dimensions that we perceive. And then the idea is like another reason I like thinking about this stuff is because, you get UFOs and aliens, like possibly higher dimensional beings. And say we're fourth and these higher entities, whatever you want to call them, are just say five-dimensional, which would mean they could manipulate the the next four, which would mean that they could manipulate time, which would explain some of the weirdness that happens with their movement. They would be able to avoid us like very easily because, if they didn't want to be seen, they would just go at the proper time when there's no one around. But, and then you go up and up in dimensions where we can't really conceive of what that even means in this state. But then, you take a psychedelic and you're like, I know. And then it goes away when you come out. So,
Do you think that consciousness itself is a dimension? Or do you think that all dimensions exist within consciousness?
right. I think that all experienced dimensions of the finite exist within and as consciousness. So it's like the totality. So it's not like simply within, it is also made out of pure consciousness. But I think like the pure consciousness itself, the unity, the infinite recognized is uh dimensionless. So again, incapable for us to perceive. I think the only way to feel that dimensionless is to be it. And I think you can use like the closest thing that we all experience to that pure consciousness, that unity, something that we all experience is deep sleep. Where when it's interesting though, because deep sleep, when we wake up, becomes colored, pure consciousness becomes colored with all this activity of itself. And instantly the human mind, the finite mind comes into existence and you try to remember what it was like in deep sleep and you can't. There's the when you're pure consciousness, it's non-dual, so the subject and object collapse into one, the pure being. So as soon as the finite mind arises, you're trying to grab at something, but the something that existed was the collapse of subject object. So we're existing in a subject object state of mind. It's impossible to conceive the dimensionless whole, but a few things about it, that you like doing it. It is peaceful. it's just absolute, it's pure peace is what it is. There are no objects, and but the thing is, we can't conceive of it. And interestingly enough, deep sleep is also timeless. We experience timelessness. That's why when the we awake, supposedly awake, when reality gets colored with this again, we can't really understand how much time we like during the experience. It doesn't make sense, you know. The whole time aspect just doesn't. It's a timeless experience of just pure being, pure peace. So I think that's like something everyone can relate to. That is the closest thing to pure consciousness without any coloring or activity, just pure being at rest.
Yeah, and the reason that we can remember anything about our dreams or our sleep in general is because, again, this is all they're slices of the same pizza.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can observe them as different pieces, but ultimately they're all connected and they all do relate to one another. So,
Yeah.
like to me, when you were saying that, I was thinking, then, well, why can we even, if we're if we're in this subject object dichotomy when we're in sleep compared to being awake. And I was thinking, why can we even remember our dreams? But again, this all just goes back to the connection of all things.
Right. I'd like to think of it as, like I said, like it is a seamless whole. So when you think about deep sleep, what the way I'm trying to think about it is there isn't a separate you that falls asleep, dreams, then goes in a deep sleep state, and then wakes up. So there's not a separate you that experiences three states. There's only the you as consciousness, the deep sleep state that colors itself in different ways. So it's like if you imagine that deep sleep, pure peace, pure being as your true nature, and it its activity exists within itself and as itself. So it colors itself with the experience that we have right now in the moment. And so then it gives you a different way of thinking of it as like a unique whole, the just total being that's always happening in the now, just a single whole. Instead of thinking like there are three different states that one separate entity experiences, it's just the whole and its activity of itself in itself.
And this is why fractals really have an impact on people that think of things as the way that you and I think of things like this, because fractals are beautifully perfect designs where they're symmetrical in every single way
Mm,
because they're based upon the circle, which is the uniform, like the unified shape of all things, as the flower of life is created by circle upon circle upon circle upon
mm,
circle. And fractals are essentially representations of the flower of life, really, within different shapes, within different flavors. So you can flavor your fractal in any way, but ultimately it is still a fractal, which is a whole made of parts, which is another whole made of more parts. We always talk about holons on the
hmm.
show. And to me, like, this is just a perfect description of the fractal nature of reality.
Yeah, and the fractal nature of reality is like mind blowing and amazing. I'm tending to think of things like this, like synchronicities, fractals, this type of stuff, like hints in our experience to show us our nature and bring us back. So it's like little hints that are sprinkled, little pieces of truth that, pop into our heads and like can bring us to the understanding that something is way bigger is going on. Like I'm sure you've seen, we talk about fractals. There's fractals in a lot of plants, but in all sorts of things, there's fractals. But then, like, the craziest one is when you zoom out to like the best image we have of the universe, and it looks like the image of neurons and stuff. It's like that is just awesome. It's amazing.
Yeah, it brings up the question then, who is hinting us or what is giving us these hints? And if you take into consideration that we could just be little tiny microscopic pieces of a massive working whole that equals itself out to be neurons, which would be the brain of something,
Mhm.
is it possible that when you do zoom out from the observable universe and you see those neural connections, is that just what we are? Or are we just this, or are we as humans a tiny little piece of a cell that is the Earth, of a larger cell that is the galaxy? Because, to me, I always look at space as something that is functioning for a reason of some sort.
Mhm.
We can observe that the earth revolves around the sun, and we have this like beautiful structure of gravity that creates this orbital nature of our solar system. But what is that? Why is it happening? What is the function of planets? And I
Yeah,
don't think that question is asked enough within the research, institutes of the world who are trying to figure out what reality is.
and yeah, that's so true, and it's crazy, like, we're very obsessed with the macro, like, trying to zoom into things, and I guess it's easier. It's pretty hard to wrap your head around the did I say macro or micro? I mean, we are obsessed with the micro instead of the macro, and, so we zoom into stuff and we see how, now at quantum mechanics, we're kind of confused, but when you look out in the like, it's so mind-blowing seeing the way, there's, you know, a solar system, that we're in, a planet with other planets orbiting a star. And then there's billions and billions of those just in our galaxy. And then there's billion more of those too. It's like, it's the most fascinating thing of all time. And there's meaning to it. Like, because meaning is inherent, there's meaning in everything. And just by what you experience in your experience that there's perfect harmony at all times. So whatever the way I like to think about it is whatever they're doing is just harmonious. And I mean you zoom out who knows how far because as in the humans like experience we think of things always relative to us. Like the planet is huge, the atom is tiny, but that's just like because of the scale of us that we reflect that onto things. I mean, we are massive to an atom. So, I mean, nothing is big or small. It just is. So, I mean, I would imagine that what we call the physical universe is just simply infinite all the way in and all the way out. There's no end to experience. When are you going to like zoom in and just say experience stops happening? There's no way. It's just not how it works. So the same goes when you zoom out. It keeps going.
And also, within that same vein, if you do zoom all the way out as far as possible, that too is as big as an atom or as small as an
Right.
atom,
Mm,
because the universe is probably the atom of some other higher order of complexity.
right. Yeah, it's probably I mean, if you think of consciousness, it's not quite, I would say, not quite a mind, but if you think along the realms of a mind, an infinite, all creative, all like just being itself, if it's infinite, that means its creativity is infinite, its complexity is infinite. And it just condenses itself, it constricts itself into what we consider to be a finite form to experience its creativity. And if consciousness is truly infinite, there is no limit. I mean, as human beings, as perceived, like we're the ones who put limits onto things. Consciousness doesn't. We limit ourselves as what we are. We say we're little separate selves, just a body and a head. But we're the ones that are putting limits on things. There's nothing in reality that says anything is truly limited. There's just what we can perceive. So we limit things.
Yeah, it's weird. And I don't know why I thought of this, but I think part of the limiting nature of things is based on our senses. And you said, we think of ourselves as just a body and a head. And we always feel like we are just this some sort of operating system that exists right within the center of our own head. And I think that's because all of our senses, except for one,
Right.
originate from our head.
Hmm.
We see out of our eyes, we hear out of our ears, we smell out of our nose, we taste out of our mouth. The only thing that we don't do that is centralized in the head is feel, because our whole body can feel. But I think it's interesting that like our senses are completely centralized in our head. I think that's why we think that we
Yeah,
exist within this head of a spacesuit.
absolutely. And what's what I like to think about with that is this is why I like dream analogies so much. It's like why it's so convincing and why we think that way. It's like when you're in a dream and you're your dream character and say there's a banana on the table, you start eating it, you taste the banana, not knowing that you are actually just a imaginated an imaginative character from the mind of the sleeper. So yes, it seems convincing that this is where all your senses are coming from, but really you are simply just a dreamed character. So everything is very convincing and it seems real and is real, but it is illusory. So like you're when you're dreaming, it's like sure, taste happens in my mouth, but really in the it's just illusory in nature. So but that's why I like the dream analogy. It's like everything that we experience here, we experience in a different life of something that we consider to be totally unreal.
Yeah, that just exemplifies the illusory nature of what we're doing here. Because if we can experience the same things here in our physical world when we're unconscious, then what does that mean for the legitimacy of the reality of this?
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so fun just to investigate it. I mean, it's truly mind blowing, even just to think about experience at all. And I think honestly, with like psychedelics, really opens that up because I find it for, a lot of people are cynics and I understand that because like you just get into the flow of existing as a human being and it all seems normal and the world is hard and things, you have negative emotions. But then I think what happens is like when you take a psychedelic, it shows you what is possible. And you have these just mystical experiences or just something absolutely wild. And then when you come back to your regular state, things look totally different. It shifts the way you see this. It's like, well, if that's possible, what else is possible? And then you start asking about this, and it's like, well, this is pretty weird too. That experience on whatever psychedelic was pretty strange. You come back here, and then you start realizing how strange this is. And then you start looking at your dreams and just diving into all these different states.
Yeah, that truly is the power of psychedelics and all consciousness work, really, is
Mhm,
changing perspectives. I think that's really what it comes down to, because when you do change your perspective, that's the only thing that allows you to mentally break free of the things that were shackling you down to what you think that you are. Because ultimately, we don't know who we are. And
mhm.
that is the main question. I think that's the question that leads you down the path of the mystery.
Yeah, that's the ultimate question. And I think that's another way to do self-inquiry, just, meditate and just you could just sit with that question and and that's kind of like I said, the neti process. It's one way. You say, "Who am I?" So the idea is you remove all things that are not you, not essential to you, not essential to experience. Another good one to ask yourself is what is awareness? What is it that knows? And I think that is it's almost wrong to say, but it's impossible to speak like the subject of experience. Like a good one we talk about is, you are not the self, you are the witness of the self. But I think, that's kind of like the like Advaita Vedanta, it's kind of an inward facing path where you look, who am I? Who am I? And then like the tantric path is more outside, it's an outward facing path. So through the inward facing path, you kind of and this is where I'm more practicing is understand that you are the witness. But then the outward facing path, you collapse the duality and understand that you are the witness and the witnessed. So you are all, you are the unity of all. And it's harder to do that, I think. I think the inward facing path is probably better to start with and still not easy to grasp, but it you can do it. With the outward facing path, I it's harder, I would say. But it is, when you look at, let's say, let's say a guitar, the most primary and fundamental thing about it is the knowing of it. So it's not like you have to say, in order to know the guitar, you have to know first. It's kind of going to sound a little bit like weird, but it's knowing shining back at you. As I said before, that it's isness, it's being, and that's all that is. And you should be able to collapse that duality and then exist as just consciousness.
Yeah, and what's really cool about each of the paths you can take, whether it be the outside or the inside, you're still coming to the same types of conclusions. So you're still going down the same path. I think of this meditation that I heard of, and I've done it a few times. It's super interesting, especially if you live in an area that is super noisy. There's a bunch of stuff going on. I
Hmm.
live right on like a main road, so it works really well for me. Especially if I like open the door to like the deck, or if I open a window or something. You just sit and you follow all of the things that are happening around you, as opposed
Mm,
to a lot of meditations people do where you're trying to empty your mind or empty
right.
yourself. This one is the opposite, where you are trying to listen to the cars that whiz by. And I was doing this one time, and like you notice things, sounds
Mm,
and vibrations that you wouldn't actually notice if you weren't paying as close attention to it. Like I can notice that when a car reaches a certain point, there's a building across the street that has a bunch of bars, as if it's almost like a fence, but it's a bunch of
mm,
bars. And you can hear the echo of the sound of the car bouncing off of the bars. And it differs from when the sound of the car is bouncing off of the building where the bars aren't there. And you start to, you can like travel into different pieces of reality through the sound of things that are happening around you. And it's very, very interesting how you can do that. And you can notice things around you that you wouldn't have normally thought of. And again, as you were sort of saying, you can identify as all of those things. You know what I
right.
mean? And it
It's
leads you to the same
experience.
place.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's you are that experience. And I think with meditation, it's great too, because when in doing it long enough and you close your eyes and sit there, and when you calm the thought, a human being, you're thinking of yourself as a human being. That's just a thought. When you're sitting there with your eyes closed for long enough and the thoughts subside, there is no more human being. There's being, but the human is an afterthought. It doesn't exist while your eyes closed, not thinking about, any ideas or specific things. And when you said that meditation you do, I do one that's kind of similar. So you could do it. You don't even really have to meditate to do it, but I have a dehumidifier in the room here. And so it runs and makes noise. And so when I sit there with my eyes closed and listen to it, and it gets so, because it's constant, so it just becomes ingrained. And you think about the scent, like your hearing. Originally, you think that hearing takes place in my ears. So ears are hearing, and then you think that the object is, 10 feet away. But then when the more you relax, you realize that where does hearing itself take place? All hearing that is ever heard. It's not the supposed object 10 feet away. All hearing is happening within your being. And it is not just close to you, it is intimately you. It's closer than close. And you do the same thing with seeing. It's like you see something and you say, that's an object, it's 10 feet away. But where does seeing take place? Take a step towards seeing. You can't do it. Seeing as a whole is so intimately close that you can't it is what you are. It's part of what you are, I should say. It's part of the whole. But seeing takes place so intimately close to you that you can't step toward it. You can only be it. And you do that with all your senses. Another interesting one you do is like with your sense of touch. Like, say, I have a table right in front of me. I grab the table and you think, okay, and normally, dualistically, you would say, now you're thinking only of your sensations. So it's like close your eyes. Normally you'd say, okay, there's my hand and it's touching the table. But when you close your eyes and relax and you focus only on the sensation, there's not a hand and a table. There's a single sensation. It is only ever one that's always happening, but we cut it up. When you think about the sensation, you're like, well, the hard thing is a table and my hand is my hand. But really, when you sit with that, it's just one unified sensation. And you could like do that with all your senses, just try to experience them purely without adding thought to them.
Yeah, because what we normally do in everyday life is we try to describe the sensation. And in
Right.
order to describe the sensation, you have to bring it out of the oneness into the duality of table and hand.
Right. Yeah, you gotta, and I mean, that's our nature to do. I mean, that's part of the fun is, you know, if we were infinite all the time, which arguably you are, but the illusion makes us have the the illusion of duality and stuff and division and separateness. But if you are just simply the infinite, then that's you can't experience the finite. You can't experience all this beautiful creativity and interesting things. So, it makes sense that eh, we're doing it for a reason, I guess you'd say. It's not just an accident. I think it is just like the creativity of God.
Yeah, which is why if you look into the Buddhist cosmology of rebirth and reincarnation, what you see is that the human realm is revered even more so than the realm of the gods, because the realm of the gods, it's boring to a
Right.
degree. If you're only experiencing pure divinity, pure love and light, then it becomes a situation where you're only able to experience that one facet. Where
Yep.
in the human realm, as an incarnated human, you're able to experience the gamut of experiences. You can experience love and hate and darkness and pain and beauty and all of these things. And just the opportunity to have that ability makes being a human awesome.
And on top of it, like it's a double plus because like you said, you experience all that stuff as a human, but if you work at it as a human, you can also experience the infinite. So it's like since we are that, we can experience ourselves as that. But we have to kind of come back here to live a life and not die, like kind of we got to have the human experience. But since we are the thing in itself, that's why we are able to have wild psychedelic experiences. That's why you can get to crazy states through meditation. And it's why, our dreams, you can have profound consciousness expanding experiences in your dreams because we are that. We are the thing. I and my father are one. It's one thing. I like I don't know the exact quote, but the Sufis, like the Sufi mystics, they would say that all that exists is God's face. So you're always looking into God's face. It's all that exists is just God. And it can be shown to you in an infinite amount of creative ways. So,
Yeah, it's the beauty of it, man. We can experience the depths of the bottom and the heights of all the way on the top. It's really interesting. And then I
and
ask myself, like, why? Why are we able to do that as humans? And when you try to relate that back to like the evolutionary chain, I look
mm,
down at my dog here who's chilling next to me, and I know he can't experience. Well, I mean, I assume, because I
right,
can't know, but I assume that he's not experiencing the same type of like dichotomy between height and depth that I am in terms of the
right,
divinity of consciousness, right? But then the
mm,
other thought is that, well, maybe he is. Maybe because this being down here, if you have a dog, anybody has a dog out there, you know that they are the most beautifully cheerful and amazing animals that are in nature. So, like, is that in itself experiencing a higher level? Is he always up in that high level? Maybe he can't feel the depths, but he can feel the heights. Like, what is like, what's the gamut of what other animals can feel? And is that dependent upon their quote unquote level of consciousness or their evolution?
I like thinking of like when you see, like, I see my cat sitting there all peaceful, like just with his eyes closed, not sleeping, just sitting there. I'm like, he is in the unity right now. You think about it though, it's like being a human being might be, in a sense, it's a gift, but could be considered a curse because, like you said, we can experience these deep lows and the high highs. But there's part of me that thinks like an animal, like a dog or something that has less of a self identity, like we identify with the body so much, they might be closer to pure experiencing. Um, so I don't know if that makes it a better experience, but I would assume that they can't, without the cognitive ability that like we have, I don't think they'd be able to experience such a low. But of course, they can experience negative emotion and negative pain. But I think the reason why we are like supposedly farther from the thing is because of our self identification, which is like we have that far more than any other being. Most animals, you put them in front of a mirror, they don't recognize them. You put us in front of the mirror, we're like, that's me. That's always me. I've always been this me. And like you start looking at yourself and judging yourself. So, and the beauty of all that, it's like, and I've been doing this more lately, is like when you're with your dog or with whatever, more people, it's like you can see the being in them. And there is only one being. Their being is your being. There's one being happening at all times, and that's you. And, like another little hint, we were talking about hints in reality. It's like, it's a bit of a hint that there's, in your experience and in everyone's experience, there's only one I. Every person calls themselves I. There's only one I in your experience. There's only one in my experience. There is only one being. There's only one I. And,
I like that.
your dog has that eye too. And it's the same one you have. We're just under the illusion of separation. But like I said, look at seeing. It is a seamless whole. You're only seeing one seamless whole. But thought arises and you start cutting things up. And it's like a dream. So things work for you. You can, if I pick up my laptop, it's only one sensation. You never experience an object like we say with matter, like, and in the materials paradigm, you think, let's go with an apple. You think the apple exists independent of yourself. That's how you look at it. You're like, okay, the apple's over there. It exists independently. But the independent apple is never experienced. The only thing that's experienced is the seeing of the apple, the smelling of the apple, the tasting of the apple, the feeling of the apple. All that's is experienced of it is directly intimate with yourself. It's not independent and separate. The only thing that's experienced of it is pure intimacy and oneness with you. There's no separation there. It's the mind that says that, the dualistic thinking of the human mind cuts it all up. But then you realize that no, the only experience of it is purely intimate with my being. Otherwise it couldn't exist. It has to exist within consciousness.
Yeah. So would you say that, I guess there's two ways to look at it. Like, would you say that you intimately know the apple because or you can only know the apple to the degree to which you know yourself, or you don't actually know what the apple is. You can only know what your senses take from the apple, the
Well, all
taste, the color, all the, you know what I mean, what you can feel.
Well, the only thing to the apple are those things. There's
Hmm.
no actual apple. There's only the seeing of it. So it's so intimately one with your experience. There's no apple that's independent. In order for it to exist, there has to be the seeing of it. At that point, the apple is only made of seeing. There has to be the smell of it. At that point, it's only made of smelling. You can touch it and say, oh, but at that point, all there is the touching of the apple. The same way I gave the experiment where you hold the table and realize it's one sensation. When you hold the apple, there's not the sensation. You can have your eyes closed. There's not the sensation of the apple and your hand. It is one sensation. So, like, kind of the second thing you were saying, the only thing to the apple is your perceptions of it. There's no apple outside those perceptions. So it's intimately one with you because what we're experiencing, these perceptions, it can't not be in the one field of consciousness because that doesn't exist. Then it's just, if it's not there, if you're not feeling it with any of your senses or perceptions, then it exists as it is, as only the thought. Then the apple exists as a thought. So it has to exist within you, within, you know what I mean? There's only the sensing of it or the feeling of it, whatever, perceptions and sensations.
So if we go back to the code analogy, is there really a such thing, or is it even possible for there to be a separate code for the apple? And then what we define the apple as is the CSS on top of the code that creates the image of it, that creates the red, that creates the taste, that creates the shape, all of that, all the things that we can perceive and sense. But is there a separate code? Is there something that's beneath it, that's beneath the CSS, that's separate from us?
I don't think so. I think it's all made of the same thing. So there could be, I would say, like the CSS and the code, combine them into one thing. That thing exists as pure consciousness. It is a single thing. And we, as human beings, we see the image and the text, but that's the illusion. So the thing is all there is, but we see it through the human mind and our thoughts and everything. We divide it up and we think we're seeing a bunch of things, but there's only the single thing happening.
So it's just as illusory as us clicking through a website,
Right.
right? Because if you go in or if you go out, it's still
Hmm.
all one.
Yeah, it's like if you're on your computer and you look at the folders on your desktop and you think that they are independent of the screen. So you're clicking on them. You think that because this one opens this stuff and that one opens that stuff, that they are separate things in their own right. When really it's only the screen showing itself, coloring itself. So the screen is reality, and the folders are quote unquote separate objects. When in reality they're all touching and they are all intimately part of the same exact thing.
Yeah, and then you can go even farther and say, well, all the screen really is a pixelated display of code and a particular pattern of readable information essentially. And then you can say, well, then what is the computer itself? And then you have the physical components of the computer itself that give off the electrical signals that allow you to see and type, but that still is just a piece of the one.
And
It's the
the
same way that everything works, as above so below.
and that's like what you're doing now. It reminds me of, well, it is as above, so below, but it also reminds me of like a technique you can do is like where you can see the one in everything, kind of like what you were saying, like, and that's fractal in a sense too. It's like you can look at anything and see the reality in it. It's all like, even in the functions of things, like with the computer, it is like a reflection of the one. So you can see that in almost all things. And like a good example of, let's say, this is kind of separate, but you can connect all things to the one. Like, for instance, when you think of a car and you say, what is a car? You think of, okay, the car is an object that drives on the street. So then you say, well, you take away the spark plugs and it can't drive on the street anymore. It can't function. Is it no longer a car? It's not. If it's not providing the function, it's not a full car. But then it goes even further than that because the car needs the road. If you take away the road, it's not a car anymore because it can't drive on the road. The oxygen needs to be taken in to go through the exhaust to make it move. So like, in order for anything to be, it's all its parts, it has to be one with everything in the environment in order for anything to function as such. So you can think of anything and try to connect how it is just reliant upon everything. And it's not what it is unless everything is existing with it at that moment.
Yeah, an interesting way to think about how humans think about things and how humans define things is that obviously, you take the spark plugs out of a car and you ask somebody, like, what is that thing that's sitting right there? They're going to say a car.
Right. Looks
But
like a car.
yeah, like they're still going to define the thing as a car. But there is a certain point in time where you take enough things away from that and they're no longer going to say that it's a car. You
Right.
take off the doors, you take away the frame, you saw off the roof, you take that thing into pieces, and eventually at a certain point then humans will say no, that's not a car.
Right.
But at any point in time you can make the argument that without one of those little
Right.
things, just without one fiber of the the floor mat or something, you could
Mhm.
make the argument it's not the whole car anymore. But we
Right.
as humans like to we definitively define something based off of its utility mostly.
I was just gonna say exactly that because it's like I think as human beings, we always when we see something, the first thing that pops into our head is the functionality of that thing. Like we project function on everything, which I know I've told you this before. It's like you could do this with anything, but a cool meditation is just like stare at your hand for a really long time until it stops being a hand. Cause then you're no, it's just the experience, pure experiencing, and you're no longer seeing the function. And you could do that with like your table. You look at the table and you think it's a table because you see the function in it, but you stare at it long enough and kind of remove the thought from it, it's just like just a thing. It's just experiencing. It's just seeing. Because if you look at it long enough, you won't even see it as wood. You'll just see it, you know? But
And you could do the same thing with words. I'm sure anybody
yeah,
out there is listening has done this thing where like you say your name over and over again and it just loses all meaning
right.
completely. That's the same type of thing. You could even do it with a specific sound. Like
Yeah.
say you play a song or something
Mm,
like that. You play the first 1 second of that song, and then you just keep repeating the first second, the first second, the first second. Your mind will be trained to not hear that first second of the song as like a guitar or a person's voice. It's
right.
especially easy with someone's voice. Like
Yeah.
if someone's saying a word, then you'll never hear that word the same. If you listen to that song again,
Mm.
after repeating it, you're training your brain to hear that in a different way. It's the same type of thing.
And then, like, exactly, you're not giving it function. You're just hearing the sound in itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This just goes to show the finite nature of how we define things. Like we're not looking at reality. We're not looking at things for what they are because you can break down our definitions quite easily of anything, really.
And, all we have is our senses to see and experience the quote unquote outside world. And it's like the Bernardo Castro thing we've talked about. It's like a pilot say they have steel over the cockpit so they can't see outside the plane, but they have all these intricate dials which allows them to navigate through the outside world perfectly well without ever actually looking at the true thing in itself. You're not so you can look at senses in the same way. I mean, since we are limited simply by the senses that we can't say that we're looking at the whole thing in itself at any moment because we're not seeing what a bat's seeing, we're not seeing what an elephant's seeing. Who's seeing the real thing? Some animals have way better sight than us, so are they seeing something realer than we are? It's no, we're all looking at different dials, and we have our senses on those dials, we have our thoughts. And I think personally it's like under thought, I think it's even more intense because under the thought dial, there's time. It's still just a dial that doesn't necessarily have to exist, quote unquote, out there. And under the perception dial, you have space. So space doesn't have to exist out there, time or space time itself. Those are just dials of human beings. Because if you think about it, like we've talked about, time in actual experience is essentially a thought. I mean, it's always now. but we think about the past and we imagine the future. And, with space, this is a harder one to think about, but I kind of like using the experience of seeing as what you're seeing is a unified whole. And where is seeing taking place? Closer than close. All of this is intimately close to your being. Then your mind kind of, rightly so, if you want to survive as a human being, projects space onto it. But it's all happening right there. When you're looking at the moon, it is intimately close to your experience. The mind says it's this far away, but it is bam right there. Seeing is always right there.
And in order to survive as we have for thousands of years, we did have to say that our ability to perceive is more real than the bat's ability to
Right.
perceive. What we're seeing is what is real. For thousands of years of evolution, we've needed to feel that way. And I think that that's the way that all animals
Yeah.
must evolve is double down on your set of perceptions and
Hmm.
your view of reality until you're able to break free of that and then that's when the next stage of evolution comes, and that's where, as Terence McKenna would say, you prepare to, you know, to become something that is not human anymore. You're traveling, through the, to the stars. That's what happens when humans shed their biological form or something like that, maybe.
And speaking of like the lines you were just going along with, like evolution, then based on that, you could say that, plants and fungus are the truly most advanced because they've evolved perfectly with as the unity of the planet, have existed way longer than us, and they require way less maintenance. And, who knows, the experience of being the mushroom could be the pure experience of unity. Maybe they're seeing it more by not even seeing. Maybe the fact that they don't have the perception dial gets them even closer to what's outside the window. And same with, plants.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about that. One is if you have evolved as a biological entity on the planet and you give more than you take, that is like the pinnacle of evolution.
Right.
That's when the plants come in, the fungus, they give more than they take. But there's also the argument that in order like we our ultimate potential, because it's so high and because our power potentially is so extravagant, we require more energy.
Right.
You plug something in, if you plug an air conditioner into your wall, that's going to take more power than if you just plug a little desk lamp into your wall, because the ability of that thing is so immense that it needs a higher degree of energy in order to live up to its full potential. So then there's the thought of, are we the Earth's ultimate mechanical entity because we require so much, we take so much, and we give back so little?
Hmm. And the interesting thing about that is, too, though, like you said, we do take in a lot and give back little, but our potential to give back more is so high. Whereas you see plants, mushrooms, all this stuff, it seems like they're in perfect harmony and they're giving what they take. And human beings, we seem to take more than we give, but we have the potential to give back way more. I mean, imagine if as humanity we're a unified whole and we had a better understanding of reality itself. I mean, we would have advancements in technology because, we don't need to use coal and all this weird and stuff that, hurts the planet and hurts the environment and hurts animals and plants. We don't have to behave this way. And, there's like the Tesla form of electricity, which seemed to be way better for the environment. They say that there's 0 point energy, that in every tiny spot of just being itself is an immense amount of energy. So they say that, maybe it happened now. Maybe they do this shit in military bases deep underground where they have 0 point energy. They definitely have some crazy types of energy systems. I mean, even in the public sphere, we have civilians creating cars that can run on water and then they die. Or, Bob Lazar made a car that, runs on like hydrogen and stuff. So there's this countless forms of energy that we can create. But, the way that we are culturally, like our whole economic system and our weird hierarchies rely upon this one form of energy that happens to take way more than it gives. But it doesn't have to be that way. So I think like the potential we have, it's vast. We can heal the planet, and we can, maybe one day put people on a different planet, you know?
Yeah, and it just seems that unfortunately the stages of us realizing our full potential involve us being fairly destructive for a long period of time. And what makes that difficult and what makes that painful is that we have the knowledge and the foresight to understand what our predicament is.
Right.
We do have that ability. So when we can, but that's also the beauty of it too, because we know what we're doing is wrong and we
Right.
know
And
what we have to do, but it just takes time to turn the ship around. It takes time to realize our full potential.
And it's true, man. Like we know right from wrong. We know it in our core when we're doing something out of harmony. Um, and like I was saying earlier, throughout all time, there has always been small groups of people who had this understanding of, consciousness and reality and the relationship between yourself and the whole. And it was always kept hidden in some temple somewhere, like underground, or known. It was in a secret book where only 100 people on the whole planet could maybe have access to it. Whereas now, I mean, the change might have already happened with the invention of the internet, where now this information is widely available to millions, billions of people. So as you know, with you and I, how much this information resonates, and this practice and this form of life, I feel like it's a matter of time before it, I don't think it's going to explode, but I think it's going to, like a virus, spread. And, it's contagious in the way that, if you meet a guy like Ram Dass in your life and you see how he behaves, you're like, wow, this guy is pure peace and amazing. How do I be like him? It works, whatever he's doing. And then if you decide to take on the practice, you start feeling like, oh, this isn't just like a faith based system. This is getting to know myself through my very most intimate, direct experience. It's not, you don't have to put faith into a book or memorize anything. It is all verifiable by yourself. And that's the beauty of it. It's not something that you got to put your faith into. All you have to do is, like a scientist, investigate yourself without the thoughts, investigate yourself purely honestly, like you're a scientist, looking under the microscope. But you just do that with yourself, which is the most fun anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the path, man. That's the only way. And that's what all of the books and all of the spiritual teachings are trying to gear us toward is the ultimate question. Again, like, who am I? That's the question.
Yeah.
You have to go on the path of trying to discover who you are. And you might not ever know. I mean, I don't really truly think that we will ever get the answer, but we can experience plenty of things that elude us to the answer or elude, or at least, as we said earlier, give us hints, give
Yeah.
us little hints of how we can discover a way to incorporate those experiences into our life to further develop our species, really.
And you saying that reminds me of one of the things we talked about on a previous episode. And I agree with what you're saying now. I don't think we can know as the way we want to know. Like, we want to know. And I don't think we can know in that way. I think we can be it and experience it only as the non-dual state. I don't think you can know it, because in order to know something, it has to be separate from yourself. There has to be a knower and the known. And I think what you can experience is the collapse of that. But at that point, you're still not going to know it. You'll look for something that isn't there.
I think that in itself is knowing it to a higher degree than you can if you separate yourself from it, which is why people like Ram Dass always talk about separateness, trying to take yourself out of a frame of reference where you're separating yourself from reality, because that's how we know most things. We separate ourselves from the thing we're trying to know. But I think, as you did say in the episode that you're referring to, the most accurate way to know something is to be it, or the
Right.
most accurate way to know anything is to know yourself.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is I think the separateness is the illusion itself, the separation between you and I, not thinking that you're something and I'm something else, rather than one being. The unity of humanity, of Earth, of the universe. The separateness is all an illusion. I'm not saying there's no utility from separating your separate self out from things and investigating things in a certain way. But I think when it comes to knowing the nature of yourself or the nature of the whole, I think it's the same process. I think that in knowing yourself, separateness will dissolve. When the finite mind, when the human mind totally dissolves, all that would be left is the pure consciousness, which is, most people would only relate to that, like I said, by the deep sleep state. But I would argue that on DMT or any high dose, depending on, you might not need a high dose, but depending on that, I think you can experience the unity. And you know what? I think one of the beautiful parts about psychedelics as well is the experience. It's a tough experience, the experience of the ego death. And when that happens, you realize because the ego is gone, but you're still there. So then you realize, well, that's not what I am then, because it's not here and I am here. You're still having an experience. You're never not going to be experiencing something. And what did Ram Dass say about death? What was his quote?
He said it's like taking off a tight shoe.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because the ego death, even, it's not death like, but even the ego death, it is like a pretty rough process. And then when it's completed, it does feel like that. It's like, oh, what was I fighting for?
Yeah,
I,
bro. What was I so scared of?
there's a, exactly. And this reminds me of one of Rupert Spira's quotes where I'm going to try to get it. It's not going to be verbatim, but like being a human conf- consciousness constricting itself into the apparent finite mind, the apparent separate human, is like when you hold your fist and constrict it for long enough. You just hold it there for a while until it feels normal. And then it feels like you have to take an active action to open it. You feel like you got to open it, but really you're just releasing. It's a non-action that brings you to your actual state. So it's like you could say the same, because if you're trying to find, because I would say as a human we are the constricted fist, and we think it's going to take an action to open our minds and become the thing, but when in reality it's the opposite of an action. It's just letting go. And then there's no, that's why they call it like the pathless path, or like you can't like try to get it. You got to just let your mind kind of dissolve. Let yourself. That's why meditation is great, and I think why DMT is incredible, because it basically happens in 15 seconds. Sometimes it's just scary.
Yeah, man, it's the path. Let go. Be here now.
Yeah, yeah. You can't be actively chasing anything. You just got to go into yourself, man.
Yep.
Just lay back and go inside.